So welcome to episode 2 of Lord Ninja Choke MMA Picks podcast. This is episode 2. We'll break down Sandhagen Figueiredo in Des Moines, Iowa. I just want to thank everyone who watched last week's episode. And today we're hoping to do much of the same with a little addition of a fireside chat at the end. So hang around for that. Last week's card was Gary Prates, and here are some of the results. We're going to show you our results each week, whether they're good or bad. Will had a great night, 56% ROI on his bets. These bets can be found on the betmma.tips website. It's a free third-party track website if you're interested in following either mine or Will's bets. These are mine. Not as good as Will's, 31% ROI, but still lots of green, which is what you want. And I believe you can follow Josh on Topology. Josh, do you have a username on Topology people can find you? They want to follow your picks?
I think it's just Slayer_tip. I don't know. I don't even know my own name, so.
Well, Slayer_tips, potentially, if you want to follow Josh's picks on Topology. He had a great week as well. And then this is the card. So this is a bit of a weaker card, I'd say, than last week. And we're going to be breaking down these fights. So I'll hand over to the boys for any high-level thoughts. Josh, do you want to go first? What are your high-level thoughts on this card?
Well, I'm not really too keen on this card. A lot of these fights kind of fly under the radar, such as the Renier de Ritter and Bo Nickel fight. But everything else really just seems normal for a fight night, really.
Yeah, I agree. It's all back to normal, isn't it? Nothing like, I guess it's not terrible, but it's not great. But I think it was such a great card last week. It's a hard act to follow. Will, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely agree that they'll struggle to beat last week, but it is quite a weird card in that it seems to be at like a low level for some spots, but then there's just some big names in there just randomly appearing. Like the return of Jeremy Stevens is so odd, and Bo Nickel being on a co-maining a fight night card is also quite odd. It just I don't know. It just feels like they've spliced it together in a strange way when you've got lots of pay-per-views scattered around a similar time. There's also some Canadians on the card when there's a card in Canada like next week, I think. Odd. Don't know why.
Yeah, I was going to say to Will that your Discord's pretty funny actually. Like hanging around in there during. I was saying to Josh, I've never done that before. Really, generally I watch fights. I just focus on the fights. But I was like following the Discord, see what people were saying, and some of them were quite hilarious.
The
Anthony Smith fight. Someone, I don't know the names, but someone said, "Why would you bring your family to your own execution?" And be like, which is obviously it's a bit sad, but also it was I was like it was prophetic, I guess.
Well, it's an anecdotal point, but did you see the quote that apparently Prates he like got gun shy trying to finish Ian Gary in the 5th because he saw his son crying? Is what he said.
Oh, wow.
Did he say that? He said that, did he?
Apparently, I read that quote, but people like to fake quotes on like Instagram these days, don't they? So I'm not sure. I read it somewhere.
I think it's probably got more to do with the 10 to 15 cigarettes a day, if that's true. Because that's, I mean, when someone said to me he smoked, I just thought it was a joke, like he smoked at parties or he social smoked. But when he actually confirmed 10 to 15 cigarettes, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if, the gas tank in the 5th round might have been slightly affected by that. But his cardio was pretty okay for most of the fight, to be honest. So, fair play to him. He's good for 3 rounds.
I actually think, in a way, Prates' stock didn't really fall in that fight because he lost in the way I expected him to, but he was more competitive where I didn't think he would be, i.e. championship round.
First fight coming up is the main event between Cory, Sandhagen, and Deiveson, Figueiredo. And Josh is going to break this down quickly for us, and then we're going to discuss it.
Yeah, quickly is the right term here. So I always compare Sandhagen to a all-inclusive travel package where instead of the hotel, the drinks, and the food that's paid for, you get the highly dynamic striker, the great wrestling, the long, lanky build, and the 5-round cardio. Now, the fact that this fight is a 5-round fight plays into his favor because the way that he strikes and moves around, it's very reserved. He doesn't really put the pedal to the metal all the time. It's very spaced out, right? when it comes to his last fight against Umar, I loved what I saw. You know, all those scrambles, all those fighting for position, fighting to escape. That's the kind of stuff you want to see from someone who was questioned about his whole wrestling background. You know, the one thing I do have great concern about when it comes to Sandhagen is that whenever he is close to his opponent, like hook range or jab range, he does tend to be a bit square. And it's during those moments where he's square that I see Figueiredo blasting with a double leg or attacking his lead leg. Any kind of vulnerability that Figueiredo can exploit, he will, but only in those first 3 rounds. That's the only caveat here. Any round after that, I believe Figueiredo is going to slow down and fatigue, as he did against Peter Yan. But, you know, you can't really count out Figueiredo here. He's an ex-champion at flyweight. You know, he's got that musculature, that build of power, but he's just scary. Like, really, he's a nightmare to fight. And if Cory is not careful, I do think that Figgy is just going to end the fight early. But officially, when it comes to my prediction and the way that I see things going, Sandhagen, 5 rounds, long arms, long legs, all that stuff. I reckon it's going to be a pretty smooth ride for Sandhagen. And I got Sandhagen to win by decision.
Yeah, I'm with you there, Josh. And what do you think about the odds? Because I think Sandhagen is a big favourite. At first, when I first looked at the odds, I was like, oh, that can't be right. Because like you said, Figueiredo's got championship pedigree, albeit at flyweight. I was surprised that I think currently Sandhagen is like bigger than minus 400, and Figgy is like bigger than plus 400. I think he's sitting around plus 400, I think.
I mean, those odds make sense to me. He's younger. It's a 5-round fight. He has all the technique and all the skills to make this a safe enough fight for him, especially since this is going to be a full-size octagon, so to speak. So he has that room to maneuver, to avoid any danger, and just to keep his ass off the fence, because that's the main dangerous place where Figueiredo does his best stuff. Yeah.
Will, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think Josh has summed it up pretty succinctly there. For me, I've always been interested by this narrative of Figueiredo at bantamweight, because I know he had to move up because age was making the weight cut harder and he's just not as fast anymore. But naturally, as a fighter, all of the things that he had to his advantage at flyweight were like bigger things, bigger power, bigger physicality, bigger explosiveness. And when you step up in weight, those you're therefore just sort of like fitting into the pack a bit more. So he doesn't really have those advantages over the rest of the weight class. He definitely doesn't have size over Sandhagen. I think Sandhagen's like 6 inches taller, and Sandhagen has very good durability. I'm sure Figueiredo definitely cracks, but we haven't really seen his power anywhere near as much. I mean, he couldn't even put Cody Garbrandt away, and I think that's a spot most people were thinking he'd get the finish in. So whilst in a fight like this, minute by minute, I think Sandhagen lands like 2 significant strikes per minute more than Figueiredo does across their careers, which, you know, that's a really telling sign in a fight that should mostly be a striking affair. So, yeah, as the minutes tick by, Sandhagen really should just be showing superiority. It's all about whether or not Figueiredo can catch him, given that Sandhagen has no durability issues and Figueiredo's, the hype on his power ability is not quite translating 10 pounds up. I think this is a really tricky fight for him. I think Sandhagen to win is almost a foregone conclusion in my opinion. So minus 400 makes sense to me as well. I had no issue parlaying it, so I stuck it in a bet with Natalia Silva at UFC 315 next week. So I just thought that minus 400 was a decent price to be combining with something else to sweeten the deal on another bet. So I combined it.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add is that I think the point about Figgy at flyweight, all his advantages. That's a great point because he's just hasn't seemed. I mean, people are quite excited about him moving to bantamweight originally. I think he got a couple of wins through using his grappling, right? But what made him so scary at flyweight was his awesome power. And I remember when he fought Brandon Moreno, it looked like a man fighting a boy. And I think one of the greatest UFC moments is Brandon Moreno subbing Figgy because everyone's like, how did that happen? And becoming the flyweight champion. So I think Figgy was way too big for flyweight and a bit of a weight bully. And he doesn't have as much of his gifts at bantamweight. And I think he's getting on in age as well. So, I think he might be like 35. So, yeah, I think that you guys have done a great breakdown. And, yeah, the value actually, even though Sandhagen is a big favourite, probably on the Sandhagen side, and there'll probably be props that you can take that can exploit that. The next fight is Montel Jackson versus Daniel Marcos, and this was one of my fights. So yeah, this was really interesting for me. I know both of these fighters. I watched them, I think I watched most of their fights. I just couldn't really remember them very well because they're not sort of memorable fighters in a sense. So Montel Jackson, he's a wrestler. By background, but to be honest, he's completely fallen in love with his hands since he's been in the UFC. He's actually got the most knockdowns in bantamweight history and the lowest number of strikes absorbed on average per fight in bantamweight history. Sorry, the second all-time fewest strikes. And interestingly, Raul Rosas is in third position, but that's not so surprising since he tends to wrestle. Montel Jackson tends to just be a stand-up fighter. It's misleading. He has a lot of takedowns in his stats, but that all came from one fight where he got like 11 takedowns. He does use his takedowns from time to time, but recently he's been on a knockout streak. He's got 2 first-round finishes. He finished Damon Blackshear in 18 seconds in his last fight. So he's very powerful. He's very long and very tall for the division. You can see here he's 5'10" versus Marcos, who's 5'7", and he has a huge 6.5-inch reach advantage. Yeah, this is an interesting fight in the sense that the odds, I looked at the odds before I broke it down, which was never a good thing to do, but I saw Montel Jackson was pretty big favourite, and that surprised me at first because minus 200 versus I think like plus 170. Daniel Marcos is undefeated. He has a 17-0 record, 4-0 in the UFC. Montel Jackson's the same number of fights as Daniel Marcos. So he's got 17 fights. But most of his fights have come in the UFC, so he's 8-2 in the UFC. So 2/3 of his fights, of his career, has been in the UFC. He's pretty much grown up in the UFC, so there's a big difference in strength of schedule there. If you dig into their records as well, Daniel Marcos has fought 3 fighters who have a 0-0 record. And for me, in some sense, having an 0-0 record is worse than having an 0-2 record, an 0-1 record, because it means you've never stepped inside a competitive cage. So yeah, he's fought a few cans. He also fought someone with like a 5-9 record. So, he's probably more like a 10-0 or a 12-0. Still, he's got the O, but I think it goes this week. I think Montel Jackson is good everywhere, basically. He's dark horse of the bantamweight division. He's currently ranked 15. I think he definitely beats a lot of people higher than him. I think he'd probably beat Figueiredo, to be honest. I know we haven't seen Montel Jackson fight 5 rounds, but in a 3-round fight, I think he would definitely beat Figgy. At this stage in Figgy's career. I think so. The watch outs for Jackson here are actually, whilst he's been in the UFC a long time, he hasn't actually fought very high up in the division. I think like the best person he's fought is probably Ricky Simone, and he lost that fight. His 2 losses are worth commenting on. So he lost to Ricky Simone and he lost to Brett John. So how did he lose? He lost because he got grappled pretty hard in both those fights. He's got this frame, even though he's a wrestler, he's got this frame where he's, people are obviously tempted to take him down thinking, well, he's tall and lanky. He actually got brilliant takedown defense. And I watched the whole Brett Johns fight, and by modern scoring criteria, he won that fight. So to be honest, like there's no doubt in my mind. That was in like 2019. I think we might have been during COVID, actually. It was during COVID. And the scoring criteria was very different then. If you took someone down and just lay on them, like Brett Johns wasn't throwing strikes, he was just laying on Montel Jackson, you wouldn't win that fight today because Jackson landed knees, he landed a few punches, but back then it was like, oh well, he controlled him for like literally 10 minutes, so he won the fight, and everyone agreed with that. So that was super interesting. So I think that in this fight, Daniel Marcos, he's a stand-up fighter, he's aggressive, but he's not high output. He's going to have he's going to have to find a way to get on the inside of Montel Jackson. I think he's going to take some punches coming in, and I think he's at risk of potentially an early KO if he takes that approach of being very aggressive. But he's been shown to be very tough. I don't think he's been knocked down. I've seen him wobbled in a few fights. He was wobbled in the Yanez fight. He was wobbled in a fight with Davey Grant, actually. People might not realize that. He was wobbled by Grant in round 1. He was wobbled by Yanez in round 3. He hasn't got great striking defense. He's a natural athlete, so he's got fast twitch muscle. He can avoid strikes. I think likely Montel's going to find the chin at some point. So I was sort of leaning that the fight goes long, but the more I've thought about it, I don't. It depends what the odds are, obviously, but I'm not super confident in predicting when this fight will end. I think there's a good chance that Montel could finish him. But having said that, I don't like to bet on unknowns. You know, Marcos has never been finished, so we'll see what the odds are. I had initially a thought about taking Montel in round 3 or by decision, but I took that off the board. I'm confident in his money line. I think he's a good parlay piece. And some notes on Marcos quickly is that he's a bit of a plodder. He hasn't got great movement. So I think that's a bad sign fighting someone like Montel, who's extremely accurate. And I think I don't really think he beat Yanez. I think it was a close fight. It could have gone either way. I don't think he beat Grant. So really, he's at that kind of level. He's at sort of Grant, Yanez level. That's my opinion. It's a bit controversial. I think Montel Jackson should win this fight pretty easily. I'd be surprised if Marcos won. But you know, he's got a puncher's chance. He is athletic. He's tough. If he goes forward and can take the punches from Montel without wearing down too much, then you know anything can happen. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so I have a bit of a unique narrative with this fight personally because, as some people know, I work a week ahead. So I research the fight. I've already finished my research for a fight card at the start of fight week. So I was looking at this fight on like Tuesday of the Gary Prates fight week. And I hadn't actually looked at the fight at all. And the odds dropped on Bet365 and it was a straight pick'em. And before I'd done any research, I just knew off the top of my head that wasn't right and that Jackson should be favored. He's got the size. He's got the diversity as a mixed martial artist. As you said, he has fallen in love with his striking, but he has a grappling background. I mean, you know, that Brett Johns fight, although it was a long time ago for Jackson, he was quite competitive in the scrambles there. And Johns is someone I always have rated quite highly as a grappler. So I immediately after I'd placed the bet on it, I put 3 units on Jackson at -110. I kind of was of the opinion that I'll just, you know, I can either cash out of it or hedge the other way if I don't like it. I expected it to move and it did. Daniel Marcos is quoted with an 88% takedown defense rate, but if you dig a little bit deeper, that is definitely an inflated statistic. He hasn't fought anyone that I would quote unquote call a grappler. And the people that he did defend the takedowns of are very low level fighters anyway. So whilst it is a bit of an unknown with Marcos's grappling, we haven't really seen him on bottom. I think it's fair to assume that Montel Jackson should have the advantage there. So that immediately gives him a very strong, well, not a very strong path to victory, but like a clear lane that he can explore that Marcos will have no way of capitalizing on offensively in his own regard because he's not going to grapple. Obviously, the size of Montel Jackson is huge. Dom, you said you couldn't remember anything about Montel Jackson, but surely you must know that he has hands as big as Francis Ngannou because everybody knows that. I think that's Montel Jackson.
I remember the commentators say every fight they mention that. Yeah,
they do. Yeah, it's impossible to forget once you hear it 1,000 times. But so that does play a part as well. I think it makes him like so much more of an amazing grappler because you think about like the Dagestani handcuff. When you've got hands like that big, it must be really difficult to defend against. But anyway, yeah. So the size of the overall frame of Jackson will make what Marcos does well with his striking probably a little bit more difficult because he likes to fight at distance primarily, and I think he's probably going to have to reassess the measured strikes and whether or not those are going to work to the same extent that they would against somebody who is a little bit more his size too. So yeah, all in all, I don't have a strong confidence on this fight in terms of like I can see a clear exploit, like a narrative that can be exploited on Jackson's side, but just overall, whenever I have to conclude who's better in whichever area, I definitely find myself leaning Jackson. So it's kind of just like he's not a master of anything, but he very much is a jack of all trades. And I think that probably will shine through. So yeah, I think Jackson should get the job done here.
Josh, what are your thoughts?
I am intrigued by how Marcos is going to prepare for the reach advantage or disadvantage that Jackson has. Like, what is it, like 6 inches? Like, it's going to be hard to replicate that in the camp as a bantamweight. So really, I'm just intrigued at how he's going to, enter the necessary range to land his own strikes, because as you said, Dom, he does plod a lot. He does, he's not very light on the feet, and that could leave an opening for a very nasty straight left from Jackson, the same straight left that knocked out Blackshear.
For sure. Yeah, I think you've hit upon a good point there. So one thing I forgot to mention is that Daniel Marcos is incredibly tough. He's had these kind of like fights with Yanez and with David Grant. There's back and forth. He can take some shots. The question is whether those guys have the same power as Montel. And yeah, as he comes in, will he get caught? And then, as Will said, he's got the grappling in his back pocket. So if he's not finding the shots at range, Montel, for whatever reason, he could go to the grappling. I personally I think that's less likely to play out that way. I think that Montel's very live, as he obviously got 2 first-round KOs for a knockout. But like I say, Daniel Marcos has never been finished, so it's going to be interesting with that. And in the interest of time, let us move to the next fight and final fight of the night, which Will is breaking down: Rodriguez versus Robertson.
Yeah, so this fight between Marina Rodriguez and Gillian Robertson is an old school kind of grappler versus striker fight. Obviously, Marina Rodriguez is the striker and Gillian Robertson is the grappler. One of the reasons why women's MMA is a spot that I really like to bet on historically in MMA is that you get a lot less volatility. There's less fight-ending power on the side of the striker. And I think that a lot of the time when you have these kind of striker versus grappler affairs, it leans towards the grappler. We saw that with Werner Jandiroba versus Yan Xiaonan at UFC 314. And one of the key reasons why it also plays a part is that because minute by minute, the striker isn't usually going to have as much time to demonstrate that fight-ending power and land the damage that they need to score points and win the round. It leads to them becoming gun shy because the priority becomes defensive as opposed to offensively minded. So another example, when Werner Jandiroba fought Marina Rodriguez herself, Rodriguez's volume and output went off a cliff. She barely threw any strikes because she knew if I get taken down, the round's over. And I've only got two like rolls of the dice to not let that happen before it all goes wrong. So immediately off the bat, I think this is a tricky fight for Marina Rodriguez because she has very questionable takedown defense. And my issue is actually not that. It's what happens when she does get taken down, because her grappling on the mat is problematic. And we've seen it so many times that when she's taken down, she struggles to do anything. In fact, I think these days in her career, she actually deliberately doesn't do anything. She would prefer to sort of close up her guard and let a couple of minutes go by where nothing happens, hoping for a stand up from the referee or letting the round end, because that obviously will give her the opportunity to go back to what she wants to do, which is striking. But obviously that means that she's going to lose minutes and therefore lose the fight, which is what we saw against Yasmin Lucindo most recently. On the side of Gillian Robertson, you've got a fighter who is improving, I think. Not so much in her well-roundedness as a striker, that hasn't improved at all. But as a grappler, she's gone from being quite a early finish reliant submission artist to somebody who can control the course of a 15-minute fight. And if the round ends, just, rinse and repeat, get that takedown and just consolidate the position. We've seen her rack up a few more decision wins recently. And I think that is a testament to her ability to manage a fight as opposed to go in guns blazing, hunting for a finish. And I think that's going to serve her really well. And that would be the difference if this fight was taking place a few years ago. Because if Gillian Robertson lands takedowns, which I do expect her to do in this fight, Marina Rodriguez is obviously going to not ask the questions of Gillian Robertson's top control. She's just going to let her have it. So this is one of those fights where I think this one's going to be incredibly boring. But I think that to me, it seems quite clear that it should be Gillian Robertson winning every minute of the fight, and also therefore being more likely to find a finish. It all kind of depends on how those early takedowns go when both fighters are fresh. But again, Marina Rodriguez is a bit gun shy when facing a grappler. So in my opinion, this is just going to be a Gillian Robertson showcase. It all depends on whether or not she wants to really push the issue and try to advance position and find the submission if it makes itself available. But Marina Rodriguez has shown herself to be defensively capable, and I therefore think this fight probably goes to a decision. So obviously we don't have any props yet, but I'm very interested to see how the books decide to line the Robertson finish versus Robertson decision discussion, because Gillian is a very prolific finisher by women's MMA standard. I think she holds the record for most submission wins. She probably does, and hopefully they think that's at play, because she's going to have a lot of top control time against a woman who's not a very good grappler. But Rodriguez is good enough at consolidating bottom position and keeping it that I expect this one to go the distance. So I'm hoping for a sneaky good number there, but we might not get it. By the way, I think Gillian Robertson at around, minus 300 at the moment, I think she probably deserves that price tag and should make it look as easy, and could even be value at that price.
That's a great breakdown. Josh, any comments on Will's breakdown?
No, he pretty much hit the nail on the head there, really. I love how much Robertson has evolved over the past 5 or 6 years. I've always favored her in the past, only because of her one-dimensional style. But now that she's really biting down on the mouthpiece and moving forward, she's gritty, she's tough, she's unafraid of anything coming her way, only to get into the grappling range and work her magic. I just really think that Robertson's going to, chew up Rodriguez like a toy in terms of grappling. I mean, not in striking, hell no. I reckon Rodriguez has that, Muay Thai ability, but Robertson, she's fought them all, really, and has proven herself time and time again. So, yeah, I'm with Will here. I got Robertson to win too.
Yeah, nothing really to add. Just a couple of things. I think, Gillian's gone down in weight. I think she started her career at 125. She's now at 115. And she's noticeably stronger and bigger at this weight class. She's been basically weight bullying opponents. Like you mentioned, Michelle Watson, she looked much, much bigger than her in that fight, recalling that fight. And the only other point to make is that Marina Rodriguez is 38 years old, whereas Gillian Robertson is like hitting her prime. She's only 30. She's been around for ages, so I thought Gillian was like 33, but she's only 30 years old. So, yeah, I think this is one-way traffic, as you guys have said. Also super interested to see the price on Gillian by sub, since that's basically what she normally does. I think she has got a couple of TKO finishes, but I think it's probably going to be a Gillian sub. I think Marina Rodriguez, she has had the ability to stay safe. So, yeah, I think the decision is a possibility as well. Let's take a look at our bets for next week. Firstly, Will.
Yeah. So as I said, working a week in advance, I kind of got a bit trigger happy on this card. I can't lie. I got very excited by a lot of the prices. So started off with Sandhagen for 3 units, as I mentioned earlier. That's combined with Natalia Silva on the card after this, or maybe 2 cards time. Can't even remember. That was pretty. There's just 2 winners. I think really should come through at a very high rate. I think that will just be quite comfortable. Bo Nickel, we haven't really talked about it, but I think he has advantages in all the right areas, and every fight starts standing. So I think he should probably do exactly what he did against Paul Craig and get himself a striking-based, probably decision win, alongside Gillian Robertson, who we just talked about. That's a 3-unit bet. Daniel Rodriguez, this is the one of the rare times for me where I get the price wrong. He's now just moved to evens, so that's an interesting fight between him and Santiago Ponzinibbio, which will probably be very close. Montel Jackson, who we talked about, I got lucky with that minus 110, so kind of sitting pretty at this point. And Misha Tate, which is a fight I was going to talk about, but I didn't really want to because it's a bit lower level. I think she's got a clear wrestling and grappling advantage here. She's being counted out because she's a bit older, but she's somebody who's always kept herself in really good shape. She's very determined, and we saw that in her last win against Julia Avila. She didn't look regressed at all. And I think if she's able to produce anywhere near the level that she was when she was, in and around the top 15, she should be able to show a real stylistic advantage over Yana Santos. So I put 4 units on it.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a little chat about that fight in a moment because we've both got bets on that, myself and Josh. So from my side, not as much outlay as you at this point in time. I've only got a couple of units on this card. I noticed you've got 15 units, which I don't think I've ever had on a card, but like you say, you found the spots, so credit where it's due. I've got Montel Jackson 1 unit, which I still felt there was some value in at -185. It's already moved in my book. It's even, I think it's -220 already, so people are absolutely loving. I'd urge a bit of caution here because I think the line is probably correct at about -200. Like I say, parlay him maybe. I'm not, because at the end of the day, this is MMA and anything can happen. I don't want to, put too much stock into this. Although I think it feels like -200 is a good price. I would take that, but anything beyond that, I'm starting to get a bit. I don't know. Maybe I'm more conservative because Randy Brown last week he was at this price around this time, and then by fight night he was a much bigger favorite, and well, it was a pretty back and forth fight. So. But in the end, he won it equivocally. So I've parlayed Montel Jackson with Sandhagen, and that gets you about even money. But even this now obviously is changing because of the money coming in on Montel. There's not much money coming on Sandhagen because he's such a big favourite. But I like that parlay. I'm interested in the Sandhagen wins in the championship rounds or by decision, which I assume will be plus money. I've hit this bet now the last 2 weeks, Volkanovski and then Gary. Don't want to jinx it, but yeah, it's definitely my most profitable prop all time. And then I had this on, I had this off. This will probably be juiced. It probably won't be worth playing, but Miesha Tate to win by decision. Yana Santos has never finished an opponent ever. Definitely not in the UFC. She's pillow-fisted. Her only victory condition, I'm totally jinxing it now for us, aren't I? Her only victory condition is decision. So if we take Miesha Tate decision, no action, I'd be interested in this prop about -200. I'd put a unit on it, I think, if it was at -200. But yeah, let's see what Josh has got.
Man, you guys like teaming up on me, don't you? I mean, both of you guys last week had what was it, Nicholas Dalby, and now both of you guys have Miesha Tate. What's going on here?
I didn't have Dalby.
You didn't have? Oh, sorry. Okay, Will.
I did have Gary. I had Gary.
Oh God. Okay, it's like a tag team then. Oh. Anyway, my bets are a bit more simplistic. I'm not going to go into it too much. But as you can see there, I do think that Sandhagen and Figueiredo is going to go to the distance. And, well, that's pretty obvious to me anyway. Maybe Figueiredo can finish early, but who knows. Anyway, Santos, moneyline, she's a underdog. How often do I pick them, How often do I pick dogs? Yeah, I mean, if you want to see more of my bets, I place them during my write-ups on Thursdays and Wednesdays. So, yeah, more to come, basically.
What's your thinking on Santos, Josh?
Oh, yeah, that's... I just don't like Miesha Tate. Like, she's been out for 2 years. She looked decent against Avila, but that's Avila. I mean, not really a top-level competitor to look good against. Whereas Santos's last fight was against Chelsea, and then we saw what happened a couple of days ago. So I feel like the wrestling of Tate is not going to be too effective against Santos because of the striking danger, the knees up the middle. She's just really, really hard to engage in the area because she's always going to deal damage. And I just feel like there's going to be a bit of an upset here. And yeah.
I respect that.
I was really hoping we were going to go through the whole podcast without anyone mentioning Chelsea Chandler's name, because I will hold my hands up that in this segment last week, I tried to make a campaign for her and I looked like an idiot. So I apologize.
We all make mistakes, Will. It's okay. I'd forgotten about it.
I didn't. I'm the bad guy here. I brought it up, so it's on me.
Yeah, no, I'll hold my hands up. It's very fair.
So thanks, Will, and thanks, Josh, for your thoughts on this card and for your bets, and thanks everyone for listening. We appreciate all the support, the feedback, whether it's good or bad, and we look forward to doing the next episode in a week's time.